A lot going on. Thank you, Chuck Todd. We are going to begin tonight on The Beat with breaking news. A historic rebuke of President Trump and his administration tonight. This crucial House Judiciary Committee has just voted to hold Attorney General Bill Barr in contempt of Congress. The move comes as a rebuke to what has become quite obvious to everyone, that Bill Barr is a controversial attorney general, particularly his handling of the Mueller report, and specifically the way that he just teamed up with his boss in a gambit that does break new legal ground. Because the other big news tonight is today, President Trump claimed executive privilege for the first time ever in his presidency, all to prevent Congress from even privately seeing the full unredacted Mueller report. So these developments have led to quite the unusual scene. And I'm going to show it to you right now. Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler addressing the press and the public after overseeing this 5-hour tense Judiciary Committee hearing, which voted ultimately to hold Mr. Barr in contempt. Mr. Nadler telling the nation he thinks now, tonight, we are in a new phase, one of crisis.
We've talked for a long time about approaching a constitutional crisis. We are now in it. We are now in a constitutional crisis. Now is the time of testing whether we can keep a republic or whether this republic is destined to change into a different, more tyrannical form of government.
We are now in a constitutional crisis. Strong words from the chairman, which he says justifies this historic vote to hold Barr in contempt, all for refusing to give Congress the unredacted Mueller report. Now, this vote goes next to the full House. Speaker Pelosi is expected to rally her caucus to pass it, which would make Barr only the second attorney general ever in U.S. history to be held in contempt and the first to be held in contempt in his own first year in office.
No person, and certainly not the top law enforcement officer in the country, can be permitted to flout the will of Congress and to defy a valid subpoena. No person, not the Attorney General, not the President, can be permitted to be above the law.
The law vests investigative authority, of course, in two different branches of government, the executive and the Congress. Chairman Nadler arguing that the Trump administration's move today to invoke privilege to block not just the Mueller report, but the entirety of subpoenaed materials would place Donald Trump above the law and beyond the reach of Congress's lawful power to subpoena.
The President has stated that his administration will oppose all subpoenas, and in fact, virtually all document requests are going unsatisfied. This is unprecedented. If allowed to go unchecked, this obstruction means the end of congressional oversight.
Nadler showing Trump that the Democrats will go to the mat on this particular fight, as Speaker Pelosi separately was bringing up the I word, impeachment, today. And while this subpoena is about a Democratic House against a Republican White House, the Democrats' argument against Donald Trump on these very issues may have just gotten an inadvertent lift from Senate Republicans, who just broke their own news late today as we were getting ready to come into the newsroom here, because they just hit Donald Trump Jr. with a new subpoena, raising the prospect of the White House having to fight both political parties, the opposition and its own. Now, the House hearing featured some fiery debates today over Attorney General Barr's role in protecting the president, the evidence of criminal obstruction against Donald Trump in the Mueller report, and where do we go from here? What is our Constitution's remedy for this kind of crisis?
The Attorney General is totally out of control.
The Democrats that are led by the chairman have resolved to sully the Bill Barr's good name and reputation.
President Trump wanted his Roy Cohn, and he got his Roy Cohn.
I think it's all about trying to destroy Bill Barr because Democrats are nervous he's going to get to the bottom of everything.
Once we get it, our hearings can continue and lead to whatever they may lead to, including impeachment.
My good friend from Georgia just asked the operative question: how can we impeach if we don't get the documents? This is all about impeaching the president.
If it weren't for him being president, he'd be in prison with Michael Cohen today as individual one.
I'm joined now by Bill Kristol, conservative journalist and former Republican White House aide and a critic of Donald Trump. He runs the group Defending Democracy Together. Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root, and Sophia Nelson, who was counsel to the Republicans on the House Oversight Committee. and brings that experience to the table. Bill, are we seeing a change here? Is this, in your view, a crisis?
Yes. I mean, look, the administration just decided to stonewall. And it's not stonewalling on, you can stonewall on a lot of different issues. You could refuse to accept a subpoena, on some criminal case where you thought you were corrupting, possibly exposing evidence that shouldn't be exposed. What are they stonewalling on? The report of the special counsel about the behavior of the President of the United States, a report that explicitly lays out 10 instances of possible obstruction, or perhaps obstruction, let's call it, and which explicitly says, incidentally, that he can't resolve that, he can't indict a sitting president, but this is where Congress has a constitutional role. So this is a direct obstruction, not just a random, gee, the executive branch isn't being very nice to Congress. I think it's foolish for the Democrats to put it that way. This hurts our ability to do oversight, as if they can't look into some problem in the EPA or in the Interior Department. This is an attempt to prevent Congress from seriously considering with all the evidence the question of impeachment. I think Congress has to go ahead and consider it with whatever evidence they can get and not get tied up in court for 6 months on some complicated issues about oversight. And I think they should say, the Democrats, not the Democrats, the Congress, the House should say, yes, it is a question of impeachment. Doesn't mean we're going to impeach, but we need to have hearings to decide whether, as the special counsel suggests, it may be the case that we will want to go ahead with impeachment.
Jason, the news headline here takes time to say because so much is happening today, and not just from one party and not just from one branch of government. On the screen, viewers see what happens all in one day. The House moves to hold Barr in contempt. The Senate subpoenas Don Jr. The White House claims executive privilege for the first time ever. And Chairman Nadler declares we are now in the, quote, constitutional crisis. For people keeping score at home and saying, well, some of this stuff seems to get discussed, it's a lot of energy, it's a lot of hyperbole sometimes. It's not hyperbolic. It's a fact to note, Jason, that this is the first time the White House has actually invoked executive privilege. And it's over this very issue, as Bill Kristol said. And given Mr. Barr's record, it is fair to question whether he is being truthful and honest in his duties today, given that he was caught in false statements previously. I give the other side of the argument to his predecessor, the only person who was also served in a non-acting in a full capacity as Attorney General under Donald Trump. Take a listen to Jeff Sessions today.
I think we're not in a constitutional crisis yet, and I don't think very close to it. There's been squabbles between Congress and the Department of Justice and cabinet agencies for years over all kinds of discovery questions, documents, and that sort of thing.
So it's just a squabble?
Well, that's what it amounts to, really.
Jason?
Look, is it a squabble? Is it a beef? Is it a scrap? Is it static? It doesn't matter, okay? The fact of the matter is this began almost 2 years ago when the President of the United States fired James Comey in order to make a point about not wanting to get into this investigation. I think Nadler is late to the table on whether or not this is a constitutional crisis. It has been one for years. The question now, and I agree with Bill, I just would go one step further. Fighting in court for the next 5, 6, who knows how many months to get these documents is a waste of time. Now is the time for impeachment. If the President of the United States, with Mnuchin as well, not handing over his taxes, and the President basically saying, I will not give any sort of information for Congress to engage in their job of oversight, that is an impeachable offense.
So let me ask you this, Jason. Let me ask you this. Your analysis and Bill's suggests that the Democrats have a lot of the cards but aren't ready for this fight, and the inflection point would appear to be now. The report is largely out. The redactions for harms to ongoing matter and other items are unlikely to overwhelmingly shift the case that is there, that Mueller clearly made multiple counts of felonious conduct by the sitting president. At what point do you think the Democrats look like the hold me back caucus on impeachment? The people who say, hold me back or I'm going to fight, hold me back. And as you know, or as you may or may not know, Jason, I don't want to assume anything, people who say a lot of hold me back don't always want to fight.
Oh, yeah, exactly. This is Mello with the nuggets, right? Like he's always saying, hold me back. Look, the reality is this. This has been held back because of Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi has pretty much thrown water on any attempt to move impeachment forward. But I think at this point, there is an overwhelming push. There is so much obstruction on the part of this president. And Ari, what worries me is I wonder if the Democrats are waiting for someone to just ask Mueller when he comes in to testifies, do you think the president needs to be impeached? Because he's not going to answer that for them. They've got to step up to the plate and answer this
Sophia,
themselves.
what do you think of Jason's point that while the Democratic caucus has spent a lot of time discussing their criticisms of Donald Trump, and name-checking various authorities from Comey to Mueller to even Michael Cohen, who laid out regrettable things, I think, by any standard, about a sitting president, some of them perfectly legal and some of them allegedly not. At what point do you think the Democrats have to stand up and decide what they're doing? And by the way, if their decision is we're not going to impeach, then at a certain point, to Bill's review of today's hearing, then at a certain point today's hearing does become less vital.
Well, two things. One, I think it's a false premise for us all to keep putting the onus on the Democrats. Yes, they are the majority in the House of Representatives, and I think they took a critical first step today. They held the Attorney General of the United States in the Judiciary Committee in contempt of Congress. And I think that that is a first step to leading us towards the hearings that I think they can no longer not have on whether or not Donald Trump committed impeachable offenses. But I think something more important is this that I want the American people watching at home to get. Number one, the Mueller report is our report. The presidency is our presidency. The House and the Congress are our Congress. They are our elected representatives. And the U.S. v. Nixon case, as you know, in 1974, and that is what I've been really mulling over all day as we've talked about executive privilege and contempt and impeachment, is whether or not a president can exert privilege, as the president has in a very big blanket way, to, I guess I'll use the word obstruct, possible criminal actions or collusion, conspiracy, whatever way you want to say it. And at the end of the day, if that is what the president is exerting this privilege for, and if he's saying, I don't want Mueller to testify, I don't want McGahn to testify, we're not going to cooperate with congressional subpoenas, then I think we're probably headed to the Supreme Court at some point. And you're right, we're going to fight about this for months, but I think that the court's probably going to have to be the final arbiter here, because it looks like Congress and the president are deadlocked, and I don't think he's going to give. And that disturbs me, Ari, that the Republicans are not doing their constitutional duty. This should not be about partisanship.
Right, although as
this
we know,
should be about right and wrong.
As we know, at least on some issues, Bill, you have the Republicans subpoenaing Donald Trump Jr., which is not a headline I think many people were expecting today. Listen to Chris Christie, who also was speaking today. This was in an interview, Jeff Sessions and Chris Christie, with our own colleague Stephanie Ruhle, playing down the idea that tonight's contempt vote is significant. Take a look.
Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress over Fast and Furious. And what happened from that? Absolutely nothing. Because the prosecution for contempt of Congress is then referred to the Justice Department, and Eric Holder said, yeah, I prefer not to be prosecuted. And that was the end of that. And no U.S. attorneys working for that Attorney General were going to prosecute him for contempt of Congress. So this is not unprecedented.
He finishes there by saying, well, it's not unprecedented. Yeah, it has a single precedent in all of American history. From what I know, attorneys general don't typically appreciate being held in contempt, Bill. And in the Holder case, it actually did help dislodge more information, although it took time. Your views?
Yeah, but I just don't think, it's a different case because there was never a question of impeaching President Obama. I guess I think they should just go ahead and schedule here. Look, they may decide at the end of the day, and I might
Bill, there was talk.
Decide.
This is a serious night. I don't want to make light of it. I would never do that. There was talk of impeaching the tan suit, but not the man inside it.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, good. It's a a different era, Ari.
That was a scandal.
It was a huge scandal.
But back to you. You have the mic,
in the world we lived in before. No, I just think they need to go, they should go ahead with the court cases, I guess, but they need to say, look, there's this Mueller report. It raises these questions about an impeachable offense. We may decide that we shouldn't vote to impeach. Maybe Democrats will split on some of these counts. That happened with Nixon. Maybe they'll decide to censure the president instead. Maybe they'll decide to do nothing. They need to schedule hearings, in my opinion. And I don't think it's very complicated. Have a hearing on each of the items that Mueller cites. Invite the relevant invite Mr. Mueller first, invite Mr. McGahn and other fact witnesses. If the president tries to prevent them from testifying, at least for now, and it will have to go to court, it'll take a while, have a hearing with other experts who can speak about what the, legal experts, constitutional experts. I just think they need to get the ball rolling here, making clear they're not impeaching him. They're having hearings so they can make a judicious decision.
Well, in your view, Bill, doesn't it seem like Mueller, and certainly some of his prosecutors who did appear to talk about it at times, they laid out a roadmap in the Watergate style with the expectation that Congress would adjudicate it. And Bill Barr misled the country about that momentarily. But now it's all out and we know it. So is your basic argument put up or shut up? You hold the hearings on finding those facts. And by the way, maybe you find the facts that there isn't enough to go forward or not, but that it's time to do that and not wait any further?
Yeah, and maybe most of the experts who testify say, you know what, we're not so sure this reaches the level of impeachment. And that's fine, but yes, I agree, go ahead and have the hearings, do the work. I don't think it would hurt for the House to do what the House did in early 1974, which is to authorize the House Judiciary Committee to go ahead and consider impeachment. That might give a little more weight, I think, to the demand, for example, from McGahn. If it's oversight, really, then I think it's pretty easy for the White House to say, this is just what Sessions said on, you just showed the clip 2 minutes ago. You know, this is one of these squabbles. Why, for their oversight responsibilities,
Right.
in terms of legislation, do they need to hear from Don McGahn? Is Don McGahn going to help inform how they write a revision of the special counsel bill a year from now? That's not serious. They want to hear from McGahn because they need to know the truth, confirm that Mueller has accurately reported what McGahn said, which incidentally the president has denied. This is an actual factual dispute about what happened, and they need to hear from McGahn.
And you make an important point, Bill, because you mentioned the Watergate example. People were transfixed by that. We are in a different era with different media, but at the end of the day, there's a reason why you have the right to confront your accuser in court. Right. There's a reason why the president's television obsession was politically useful to him, because seeing and hearing from these people does change the nature of the public understanding of what happened. Whether it helps or hurts, I can't predict, because I haven't heard the McGahn testimony myself. I read the report. Donald Trump appears worried that that person telling that truth, speaking his truth, if you will, might be hurtful. Bill Kristol, Jason Johnson, Sophia Nelson, thanks to each of you.
Thanks, Ari.
Coming up, what